Thank you. So we've got apologies from Ross, who's on a 2-day course. Apologies from Clint, who's working as a regional manager for a couple of days out of town. And I've also had we've had a message from Rogan saying that he's an apology today. Not quite sure where Mike or Jonathan are, but let's get underway, just noting that, of course, Monique is away at the moment, and David's the boss, and so look forward to it.
So, good afternoon. Just to signal, plan is to start with integrated growth today, then the Levin Wastewater, and then solid waste will be after that. And at the time we get to the solid waste one, I'll get Dan just to briefly explain why that one's now going to be public excluded. But the first two are open, and welcome Stephen, our first member of the public to today's workshop. So we'll hand over to Lauren, who will start us on the integrated growth one.
Kia ora koutou. Interested and excited today to present integrated growth, bit of an update in a proposed scope and series of key deliverables. You'll remember back in, would have been about November, I think it was, last year, that we began to introduce this topic to you. And so since then we have been engaging across the organisation, doing some research about what others are doing and kind of really getting into that headspace and figuring out what we need to do to deliver the right things in the right place at the right time, or I suppose to phrase that more correctly, to enable the right things to happen in the right place and at the right time. So the purpose of today's presentation is to provide you an update on the program. We will unpack a little bit more about what it is, because as we've started to define some key deliverables, that's probably crystallised in our minds a little bit more. Identify some of the issues and the opportunities it seeks to address, and I'll draw your attention to one particular opportunity when we get there. And it's great to have Stephen here in the room today because it's relevant to him, and I think his attendance here today sort of highlights the opportunities for us to work across council and across landowners and across infrastructure providers as well to enable these sorts of opportunities. And then we will unpack some of the recommended key deliverables that would fall under the integrated growth program, noting what I said back in November, that it is a project that doesn't necessarily have a defined endpoint. It more sort of signals a way of working and a way of approaching this growth opportunity, but this growth challenge as well that we find ourselves faced with. So the questions that we'll be asking you today will be whether or not you have a sufficient understanding of the challenges and opportunities that we're trying to address, whether you think the proposed work streams and the key deliverables that sit under those work streams, which I'll take you through in a moment and which were outlined in the pre-reading, whether you think those help us to move in the right direction, if there's anything missing, anything that doesn't need to be there. But probably most importantly is, are we prioritising the right things? Integrated growth is so big and so broad. We could do a million different things. We obviously don't have the resources to do that. So we want to make sure we're really intentional, really strategic, and really clear about where we prioritise our action. So that's a key piece that we'll be looking for your input on today. And then final question that we'll ask you to keep in your mind as we move through the presentation is, how do you want to be involved and informed going forward? While a lot of this work will have a primarily operational focus associated with it, it's obviously important that you know the full picture, that you can see how it's working, and as well as that sort of feeding into, I guess, the overall scope and that prioritisation piece. So today we are in the do section of the no see do triangle, and that we're asking you for input and direction. So kicking off with the reminder on what is integrated growth. So basically it's a piece of work, a program, a way of approaching growth that seeks to more effectively align and integrate land use planning and infrastructure planning. And the message that you'll probably keep hearing me say is enabling the right development in the right place and at the right time. So it's about building a clearer picture of where we want to be and the different options that exist for getting us there. It includes a series of key deliverables, but as I've already mentioned, it also is about establishing new ways of working rather than having a defined finish point. So in terms of what integrated growth will address, It will address both challenges and opportunities that growth presents to us. So some of the opportunities are around those large-scale development proposals that we see in front of us, Taraika being one, Ryder Crescent being another, and Tararoa Road being a third. And there'll be many more as well, but I think the Tararoa Road one is a key example, presents a real opportunity in that we've got an industrial growth area, we've got live industrial zone land that is yet to be developed, we've got an O2NL interchange, we've got the NIMIT, the North Island main trunk line, so the main railway section, as well as Taraika and another urban growth, housing urban growth area, all in that immediate vicinity. So you can quickly start to see there's a lot of key players there. There's landowners, there's council, there's NZTA, there's Kiwi Rail. There's some complex problems there that we need to address, but a real opportunity for us to all work together to enable developers, to enable infrastructure providers, and to enable council to deliver an outcome that really works for the community and ensures that the planning is in place so that the environmental effects of that are managed and so the costs and benefits are fairly shared in a way that is appropriate for the scale of the development. Integrated growth will also help us to better respond to those out-of-sequence development proposals. So on one hand, we've got a growth strategy which signals where we think the district should grow, when and where. But we also know that in some ways, as soon as you go and define a growth area and a growth strategy, you raise the value of that piece of land and in some ways almost encourage development in areas that aren't identified as short-term growth areas. And we know that that's an important piece of the puzzle, is being able to respond to those out-of-sequence development proposals. It's just because they're out of sequence doesn't necessarily mean they're inappropriate. It just means they might be different to what we thought or what we signalled. But we want to make sure that we respond to those in an appropriate way, again, being conscious of the benefits that those pieces of land offer, but also the costs that those out-of-sequence development proposals trigger, and making sure that we have the toolkit available to us to be able to share those fairly. And so that brings me on to the third bullet point, which is about ensuring that we've got the ability to tailor our approach to responding to those proposals based on both the ease and the impact of the proposal. So if you sort of think of, I guess, council's role as a spectrum, at one end of the spectrum, if we got a proposal that aligned really well with our strategic direction, we might want to respond to that in a particular way. Whereas another proposal maybe that didn't align as well or had serious costs or serious challenges, we might just simply fulfil our regulatory function in how we assess that proposal rather than sort of being more active or taking a greater lead. Integrated growth will also help us to understand more the where and the when of development as best we can, knowing that there is a certain element of that, especially the when part that we can't control, because ultimately council isn't the organisation and isn't the body that's actually delivering businesses and houses on the ground. We're simply just creating the opportunity. But we can start to build a clearer picture on what the most likely scenario might be so that we can modify our approach and monitor whether or not things are happening the way we expect and then respond accordingly. And then to close out the overall challenges and opportunities that integrated growth will address is being able to provide advice to developers in an efficient and an effective manner where they can kind of come to council once and get a quick answer in one go. And there's already some really good work happening in that space at the moment. So this is really just about pulling it all in together and illustrating that all the different pieces of work that the organisation are doing are all contributing to this broader picture of how we make the most of the opportunity that growth provides us. So to provide you just a little bit of background, as I mentioned, the last briefing was in November. We provided an overview at that time of what integrated growth is. We highlighted how it fits with council's strategic priorities in other documents, and I suppose the key point there is that enabling balanced growth is one of council's top 12 priorities. We suggested some outputs and had a little bit of a discussion about what success might look like, and we also gave you a very quick overview on what some of the latest population stats were telling us about who we're actually planning for. And probably the key point to remember from that section about population stats is that we're planning for an increasingly diverse community in terms of age, in terms of ethnicity, in terms of household makeup. So I apologise for the small text here, but it is these work streams are what's outlined in the pre-reading, so don't feel the need to strain your eyes up there. But The key point that I wanted to highlight here before diving into the key deliverables, which you'll see in the upcoming slides in slightly clearer font, is that we're proposing 5 work streams under the Integrated Growth Program. And while they look like vertical pillars, I do really just want to emphasise that every way that you put a pillar this way, there's a connection that can be drawn across the 5 pillars as well. And that's really the key thing about integrated growth is bringing that integration. But just to run through what those 5 key work streams are before going into the key deliverables, just moving from left to right, is firstly is about responding to market. That is firstly a national policy statement for urban development requirement. So there's a statutory need for us to respond to market drivers and market proposals. But also we know that the private market and private developers are really the key body in which we actually see houses built. So it's important that our planning takes them into account, what they're telling us about their experiences, and making sure that we can respond in an appropriate way. So the key point really to emphasise there is that at the moment we probably largely rely on sort of our statutory tools, the resource consent process, just simply are you mitigating adverse effects appropriately or not. But what that kind of, I guess, leaves us open to is, or what that doesn't really address is being able to capitalise off those out-of-sequence development proposals, but also adequately planning for the next stage and the next stage and the next stage of development. So being able to, I guess, have a full picture of what tools exist to us, available to us, to help us, I guess, do a little bit more so that we're planning for the future and not just creating a problem or kicking the can down the road by, building a pipe that works for that development, knowing that another development's likely to come in 5 years and needs something bigger and better. This is about how we can respond to those opportunities. The next piece there is about decision making and an evidence base. And right back at the beginning of the presentation, I mentioned we're often working with imperfect information when we're dealing with growth. We often don't know when proposals are going to come in, where they're going to relate to. We might have to make a decision on X proposal, and then tomorrow Y proposal comes in, and that's even better and aligns even more with our strategic direction, but we didn't have the luxury of seeing that when we had to make a decision on X. And so this work stream is about both increasing our ability to make strategic decisions with imperfect information, but also more effectively capturing the information that we do have and having it all in a central place so we can both, I guess, test and monitor our assumptions and plug those gaps where we're able to. The third work stream is around policy settings and toolkits. And that word toolkit, you would have heard me mention a few times, that links in both to the responding to market piece, and then when we come to the 5th work stream, the showcasing opportunity piece as well. But in terms of the policy settings, it's about making sure that all the different policies that council have, from the district plan to the development contribution policy to the rates remission policy, that those are all aligning and achieving the same kind of outcome. Moving on to the 4th work stream there is about making connections and aligning action. And I think one of the greatest strengths that council has is its ability to integrate across different organisations, connect up different infrastructure providers, connect in with the development community. And so that's about capitalising on that piece, but it's also about making sure that we're functioning as efficiently as possible between the different departments of council that all have a touch and a feel on growth. And so we might hear from time to time, or you might hear from time to time, that developer A might go in and sort of talk about a development proposal with one part of council and get one answer, and then they go and talk to a different department and they get a different answer. This is about addressing that piece. And again, it's important probably to point out that some good work is already happening in this space, but I really just wanted to illustrate that is a big part of what this integrated growth program is and what it's about. And then the final work stream there is about showcasing opportunity. So that's highlighting both the development opportunities that exist, that we're looking for someone to pick up and carry forward, our growth areas, presenting them in a way that people know about them, they know what the opportunities are, and they have a clear picture about what developing in that area would mean. But it's also about helping the community to understand what growth means for them. So more people, means, of course, more living opportunities, more employment opportunities, more services available to them. And the better we plan for that, the less upward pressure there is on affordability. So I want to just try and illustrate, I guess, that whole growth narrative and what it means for both developers but also for the community as well, so that they can connect into that.
Happy to take questions as you go along, because this is obviously all about more than just pipes in the ground, but there's a big part of this is pipes in the ground, water infrastructure, but it's about utilities and all those other things. But in the context of local water's done well, where there's lots happening at the moment, and yes, we haven't made any decisions around this yet. Have we kind of scenario played what this looks like if there's an external, if there's a water services agency, CCO, or if this is in-house? Like, have we, because obviously there's a slight less loss of control in terms of how we actually manage and plan for particularly the growth areas. Sorry, that's...
Yep, no, I understand what you're asking. So yes, under that decision-making and evidence-based work stream, there is a deliverable we're suggesting about exactly that, thinking about what local water's done well and what a future council-controlled organisation could mean for aligning infrastructure and land use planning in the future. And I would expect some options or some potential pathways to come out of that. So we are at least somewhat prepared for what may come in that space.
Lauren, the other issue for me is that often as elected members, we're further down the track in terms of understanding of what is going on in the marketplace. Obviously, people are coming to you guys to say this is what is happening. So often for us to get that bigger picture in terms of, where it's all going and trying to set a strategic direction in terms of that, sometimes we're a little bit behind the eight ball in terms of that. You're well down the track. So what's your thinking around making sure that councillors are sort of either not involved in the decision, but aware and is it fitting in with the strategic direction that we're setting?
So one of the key deliverables that suggesting is that we start to capture spatially the development queries that are coming in to us, so we can overlay that with things like the growth strategy and see whether the development queries that are coming in are where we think they should be or whether they're happening somewhere completely different. In terms of those development queries, so at the stage before they become a consent application, they can often be commercially sensitive, so we'd have to be careful about how that information was used. Once applications are lodged, they are public information, so perhaps a piece of that would be how we share that information on whether it be a quarterly basis or something like that. We have actually had questions from developers as part of the Omnibus Plan Change Hui that we've been having, asking that we send out like a monthly or bi-monthly digest of what resource consents have been granted. So that would certainly be an option in terms of starting to build that picture of what's happening, when and where.
Often, when you're driving around town, you suddenly see, activity in certain places, and you thought, where did that come from, type of thing, because we're not aware of it. So some sort of communication at times would be valuable, I think.
Yeah, I think it raises 2 points to touch on. One is there is always an interesting lag. So an application for, say, subdivision can come in, it might be 8 years later that you actually see the people building. So depending on how good your memory is, you might recall, it did come to council at one point. It's just been that length of time. One of I think the future aspirations with this is trying to get to the point where the council of the future has a completely different set of tools that it can use to inform its decision making. So you as elected members can sit there with almost real time sort of information, understanding where we're at in terms of capacity, where we're at in terms of yield, what's the interest and the demand. Whereas historically, we've had to almost do a point in time. This is the growth strategy based on what we know at the moment, and then we sort of will review that in a few years, and you get various ways of having information sort of fed to you along the way, but it's always sort of retrospective, if you like. So potentially being able to move in this direction, and some of the tools and deliverables that Lauren will speak to are getting us closer to building that almost real-time picture and a greater level of sort of monitoring in terms of, yes, when we set projections and when we set plans for needing to do something by a certain time, we can understand where we're tracking from a capacity or a yield point of view.
So under each of those key work streams is a series of suggested key deliverables. So probably don't intend to read out every bullet point, but just wanted to sort of draw your attention to a couple of the key ones under each work stream, but also happy to take questions and comments about anything that you wanted to unpack further that perhaps I don't highlight. So under that responding to market key work stream, some of the key deliverables are around spatially capturing those queries, developing some specialised and clear pathways for those more complex applications that come into us, so that rather than sort of how things work right now is application comes in and we typically only have 20 working days to process an application, and that's whether it's a 2-lot subdivision or a 200-lot subdivision. And you can imagine that a 2-lot subdivision is very different to the complexities that something like a 200-lot one might. So exploring what some pathways might be to respond to those complex ones in a more effective and a more efficient way, and communicating that with the development community so that they know that we have these options and have these, I guess, requests of them in terms of how they engage with us so that we can deliver a good process for them when the application comes in the door. We also want to explore some of those other tools that I've touched on, things like private developer agreements, which could look different depending on whether we're talking at the plan change level or at the consenting level. And then probably the last one to touch on there is the relevance of the district plan work to this responding to market piece. So that's things like the omnibus plan change 6A, and later on plan change 6, which is the rest of the greenfield growth plan change.
Lauren, this might be a bit down in the weeds, but one of the things I wonder under this column might be useful, helpful, and is taking our growth strategy, the 2040, and kind of visualizing in a, it's similar to the O2L map, where you get to see the whole district to show what the vision is, like what the direction is, where we think things will happen, and where we're looking to encourage things to happen, and where we're kind of open to things happening. In some ways, signaling to the market, both big guys and little guys, like where, because I know it already exists, but I don't know if it's just too many. I don't know if it's too many layers to go through. Is that?
Yeah, I understand what you're saying, and I think a key thing is the growth strategy is a little bit, I guess, unsexy in a way, difficult for people to connect with and to understand what it means. And one of the final slides is under the showcasing opportunity workstream, which again just sort of highlights the interconnectedness of while a key deliverable might feature under a particular workstream, it also clearly connects with other ones, but have got a sort of quite an exciting, or at least the planning geeks like me think it's quite exciting, final slide that demonstrates something called a digital twin, which is like a 4D imagination of what a town or a district look like now and what it could look like in the future, and that would be an effective tool, I guess, for looking and visualising what the future might be. Wellington City Council have one, so I've got a link to their one that we can dive into. And then I guess the other key piece under the showcasing opportunity workstream is that we're suggesting what we've called at the moment a development prospectus, and that might not be quite the right term, but basically a prospectus that will set out sort of the easy, medium and hard development opportunities so that developers know when they come through the door for the first time whether they've got something that's quite easy or whether they've got something that's quite hard that's going to require quite considerable investment from them to move forward.
Oh, I just picked up on your digital twin comment. I won't give you my thoughts on them, but I mean, this council needs considerable investment in GIS and other technologies to be able to provide those sort of tools or to use those tools in the planning sense anyway, and we're not doing that, which is something that needs to be addressed.
So moving on to the key deliverables under the decision-making and evidence-based work stream is probably two to draw your attention to there, given we've already kind of talked about the local waters done well piece. First is around creating a decision-making matrix. It helps us to evaluate where we focus our attention when those proposals come in the door, and that's sort of balancing up that ease and impact, that strategic alignment, how much housing or how much employment opportunity this proposal would generate, so that we know whether we're sort of jumping in and really supporting or almost leading, or whether we're just simply responding in a regulatory sense to a proposal. And then the second one, I guess, to draw your attention to is how we start to illustrate key deliverables or key actions out of things like the infrastructure strategy and like the Levin Wastewater Master Plan that provide that sort of one-stop shop piece of information that visualises what's going to happen when and where, so people aren't having to dive into really complicated documents like the LTP and the infrastructure strategy to know what's coming online when and where. And that's going to be useful both for council staff, probably for elected members, and for the public and members of the development community as well. In terms of the policy settings and toolkits workstream, the key piece there in my mind is the review of the development contributions policy and other kind of financing related policies like the rates remission policy, and seeing that alongside things like our more sort of statutory documents like the district plan, and ensuring that they all align with the strategic direction of council. The other one really to draw your attention to there is around that toolkit of other financial levers, including guidance on when and where to use them. So when to use a private developer agreement, how the vested assets policy that Blair and his team are working on would fit into this, when a targeted rate might be an appropriate option, for example, to bring on a development area, and any other toolkits or opportunities out there that we might not be aware of sitting here today. In terms of making connections and aligning actions, this workstream and the next one around showcasing opportunity are probably more about how we work rather than what we're actually doing. But what we are proposing there is some quite deliberate steps that help to ensure that we are working in a truly integrated manner. So how we're making sure that parks, consents, infrastructure, the integrated growth and planning team are all actually seeing the same information, responding to the same things, and seeing how their different work streams all connect up with each other. And that's just really through that sort of being intentional about relationship building. But touching on relationships, there are, of course, key external partners that we're going to need to bring on this journey with us. It's people like the Horowhenua company, other infrastructure providers like Electra, KiwiRail, NZTA, and then some of those other community groups that really sort of have their finger on the pulse in terms of what their community are experiencing in terms of accessing housing or accessing employment opportunities and what that need is for different types of land. And then the final work stream and some of those key deliverables there is around showcasing opportunity. So the two exciting deliverables under there are the digital twin piece that touched on, and around that developer prospectus. Going back to the digital twin, a key piece will be, of course, exploring the cost and the feasibility of that. Certainly not a super techie person, so I don't actually know what is involved in here, but what I do know is that there are, a lot of opportunities to use a digital twin in a really exciting way. To explain a little bit more about what a digital twin is, it's basically a virtual representation of physical assets and of the physical landscape using real-time data, and that allows us to then sort of model, visualise and understand what different proposals might look like and what they might mean for our infrastructure and for our environment. And if we can just click on that link there, we'll cross our fingers. It will just play a short video of the Wellington City Council's digital twin. This was actually presented at the Christchurch NZPI conference a couple of years ago. Councillor Tommy Hunter, you might remember the very exciting presentation that closed out actually the conference. So this is what it kind of looks like, basically. This is, of course, a pretty sophisticated and high-tech one. I believe the Wellington City Council actually got some external funding to develop something of this level. But you can also develop them at a particular development level as well. They don't necessarily have to be sort of a citywide or a district-wide option. So yeah, you can sort of see real-time data of what's happening on your roading network, for example, or get real-time data of sort of how your Three Waters infrastructure is performing during high rain events and various things like that.
One of the beauties of that digital twin of Wellington is it's not just the stuff above the ground as well. They actually have a pretty good understanding of their pipes now. Admittedly, there's issues with their pipes, but they have a very good model that shows where their pipes are anyway, and obviously they can then use that to model different scenarios and things in a way which is obviously sort of beyond us presently.
Oh, I've just got a question, which is probably a little bit outside the box in terms of some of the planning and growth stuff. One of the big things which bugs me about growth is that, you know, our district is pretty much about 23% Māori land, and we always forget about Māori land when it comes to development. And, you know, I know there's a lot of restrictions and barriers around Māori land from Te Tere Whenua Act and courts and things like that, but then the council just forgets it as well, which adds an additional barrier and just sort of lumps on to that degradation of Māori land over time as well, rather than seeing a potential or an opportunity or a willingness to discuss that we have this asset within our district which is completely underutilised. And there are a lot of Māori landowners currently trying to look to develop some of their lands as well.
This is for my curiosity. Is there something that you believe the government could do to enable that? Because where my mind goes is here we are trying to wrap together a regional deal proposal, essentially, where part of that is looking at, well, what do we offer as part of the regional deal, but also knowing that the government isn't looking to put money into it, what are the things that we might want from government to help enable housing growth development, for instance, being one of the themes. And so if that's something that's worth us adding to at least that list of, well, this is something government we believe there's a real opportunity in our district, it's underutilised, it does make up the percentage that you say. Government, can you do something to help?
I think it's even at a higher level than that, even just identifying the issue that there needs to be some work or focus or some study on what we do in this situation. I mean, for us as a district, it's a huge chunk of land which is sitting there and contributing nothing, not even to the agricultural economy essentially. So it's not even coming up with specific solutions or saying we're going to do this or we're going to do that. It's just actually recognising that there's an issue and that we need to start working on this issue.
Could we perhaps add in under the show, maybe the showcasing opportunity piece is a particular deliverable around looking at identifying at what the Māori land holdings are and a quick kind of analysis of what opportunities there might be, sort of once you sort of take into account things like hazards or proximity to towns and infrastructure availability and that kind of thing.
Thanks, guys. A couple of points from me. Thanks, John, for raising that, because that was actually the first point from me. But I was going to ask, like we go through these boxes and these criterias, but I still wonder what's the process to prioritise. Because how do you prioritise planning, funding over environment, social, economic? How do you how do you actually formulate the priority at the end of it? Because I don't know what the criteria is to do that. And then that's different to different people. I was a little bit drawn to this because there's nothing that mentions Māori in here at all. Nothing that mentions the treaty. And then when you go to certain points like respond to market. So you're saying there's a need for housing, But what we also know is that we've got an extremely large amount of empty housing. A lot of housing that's holiday homes, a lot of housing that people don't want to tenant because they've had bad experiences with tenants. People actually prefer to leave their houses empty now than to collect rent because of fear of bad renters. So I just sit here and I think to myself, how do we fill that void? Respond to market. In the PDAs, one of the points I wanted to raise was what I've seen of PDAs is it locks iwi out. So how do we get around that? How do we ensure that the people that I'm here representing are able to participate in all facets of developments? Because what I do know is PDAs certainly shut the door on those that aren't engaged in that process. Decision making, evidence based. Again, picking up on John's point, is so good. What is the land availability out there? Not just Māori. What land is actually available in the district that can be developed for purposeful reasons in the future, which is great. But what we do know is that there's a huge amount of Māori land here that is, as John's already alluded to, not being utilised. And in fact, the system's so corrupt that people actually are forced into leasing their land because you can't use it. That's what's happening to our Māori landowners. So I think there needs to be a piece in here, like John said, where this council are actually advocating on behalf of Māori landowners with the Māori Land Court and others to try and determine the best path to help whānau develop Papakainga, develop Tūranga Waiwai on their land that they own, that they wish to reside on. So that for me is critically missing out of here. There's just nothing that even leads you to it. Yet we know, evidentially based, the most amount of available land today in this district is Māori land. And a lot of them are forced to sell because they can't utilise it in the current form or the status that it's in. So this council should be helping those people. Showcasing. I think that's a cool part, but one thing I about showcasing for me is actually what we don't do is we don't do lessons learned. What we don't talk about enough are the things that don't work and then show how we change them to make them work. So it's great to promote all the wonderful things we do, but we actually need to take people on the journey with the things that haven't worked and why we led to particular decisions, whether that's by way of experience or by way of crown imposure on us or whatever it is, but it's actually part of the story, illuminating to the people, the politics we have to navigate sitting around this table. That's pretty much it. But yeah, certainly not enough for me around our Māori people.
Very useful comments there, and I think certainly picking up the importance of doing a piece of work around understanding the opportunities that exist on Māori land, and probably just to highlight that any kind of development proposal, whether that goes through a plan change or whether it goes through a resource consent, require some form of approval or process under the RMA, which is where we sort of where it's set out what the process is for engaging with iwi Māori hapu. So I guess that the absence of that referenced in the work streams is purely because it's picked up when you get to that development approval piece in terms of understanding environmental effects, cultural effects, and feeding that into the proposal. But definitely take the point around, I guess, not losing sight of the opportunities that exist on Māori land, and I guess the pathways for Māori to be a part of, I guess, the development opportunities and realising that aspect of growth benefit.
Well, the PDA stuff, to be really clear with you, was that if this council recognised certain iwi partners in Aotearoa, then all iwi partners should be notified appropriately and not anyone given exclusive rights at any point in time, because this council is obliged to engage all that we recognise within this district, and we know that it doesn't right now give effect to that. We know it does shut people out.
just to explain what I mean in this context by a private developer agreement, it's more an agreement that says, so let's say developer A comes in, they've got a 200 lot development, up the road, it's right next to another growth area that we know is going to need or is going to be able to accommodate, say, a 500 lot development. And so developer A needs a pipe this size for their development. But we know that a pipe this big is needed because there is that next growth area. Under sort of a pure RMA sort of assessment, you can't make someone pay for more than what they need for their development. But through a private development agreement, for example, you could say, well, look, if you upsize that pipe to provide for the next growth area, then we can reduce your development contribution in this area. Or let's say you've got a reserve that's going to benefit more than just your development area. We can recognise that through this process, but you need to pay for this component in exchange. So it's really at that more commercial level, in who pays for what infrastructure and how we can make that efficient and effective in a variety of different ways, rather than just sort of necessary exchange of money right at the outset.
Lauren, just a couple of questions and comments. Under the decision-making and evidence-based column, where we've got the produce a decision-making matrix to determine how we respond to development proposals. Is that matrix around resourcing, like how we allocate resources internally? So that's the first part of the question. And then the second part of the question is, could that matrix potentially explore sort of a scale where we might deem something as strategically important, or there might be some different layers, so that we can kind of make an assessment, what is this development about hitting some principles in terms of taking the district forward? Is it, is it meeting a priority need or something? Like, I'm just thinking, could there be something weaved into that matrix to kind of help us identify when it's something that we really need to back as a council? And we'll have different views on what that is, but yeah, and an example might be a golf course that brings a whole lot of. So some would say no, that's not strategically important, but others might say this is a significant economic benefit to the district, therefore it should get. So,
That's sort of exactly what we're trying to illustrate here. Is there'll be some proposals that have a whole bunch of significant benefits for the district beyond just a development in and of itself, and want to have a system or an approach that allows us to recognise that, so that we're not necessarily throwing the same energy and resource at something that has significant district benefits as we are to something that is really just a small, private, complicated development proposal. Probably a couple of things to touch on there, and I could probably give an example of where that's sort of already been playing out, is we do need to be really careful that we differentiate between that and our regulatory function, where we're simply assessing what the environmental effects are. So that's something we need to be really careful of. But I think an example of where we've taken that approach or taken that tailored approach recently is with Plan Change 6A. So that came into council as a private plan change application, and council had the option of either adopting it as its own or saying, no, it's just going to carry on as a private plan change application. And in that particular case, for a number of reasons, including the strategic alignment of that plan change with our growth strategy, and because of the benefits that it offered, council made the decision to adopt the plan change. So taking that more sort of leading approach, as opposed to just processing it as a private plan change application, which would probably be at the more sort of the do minimum or just doing a regulatory role. And so if we were faced with another rezoning proposal, for example, and it had significant environmental issues, or it didn't really deliver anything that aligned strategically with our growth strategy, a matrix like this might help us say, cool, we're just going to process that as a private plan change application, and take a different approach than what we did for PC6A.
Very just add to that, another scenario might be when you get two say proposals come in at the same time, and council's faced with that decision around maybe added investment, or having to make some of those calls, and so that's where it can be helpful to understand on that scale that you talk about. Well, actually, maybe the investment, greater return on investment is here. Council providing infrastructure or something at this point in time because of these benefits A, B, C, D, whereas this one may only have A and B. So again, you can see how that framework could support that sort of decision making as well.
Your comment leads directly into my next, was going to be one of my bullets, and I've talked about this before, this idea of a contestable fund, capital fund for development, and I, for various reasons, I know that there's some challenges around that, but would it be possible to kick the tires on, or investigate, explore, whatever word you want to use, that kind of idea of a contestable capital fund for out of sequence developments? So obviously, where we've identified a growth area, we're going to invest invest in capital works to service that growth area. But for those out of sequence developments, there might be someone that's bringing a really great idea, and so if we can signal to the market that yes, we actually do invite some of those proposals, but you've got to be prepared, you've got to come, there's some contestability about it, if you're ready to go, we're going to back you. Is that something we could explore or just kick the tires on?
I think it's something we can explore. Sort of a question or a nervousness that comes to mind for me immediately would be around the timing of when someone could apply for that fund. So is that after they've already got a resource consent application approved, or is it before? Because my nervousness would be if they applied for that before applying for resource consent, is it almost creates this perception that the outcome of their resource consent has been predetermined and hasn't been appropriately assessed under the RMA, and so there'd be some, not sort of knowing about the finance side of things, but there would be some kind of regulatory and process related things that we would need to be really careful about and explore before we committed to something like that.
Yeah, I really don't like that idea, and I'm going to disagree with Sam. I think it's impractical for council to have funding sitting there doing nothing, but also for council to signal, here's our growth areas, here's what we're planning to do in the next 10, 25 years, but then welcome anyone can come along and disrupt all those plans and do what they want. I mean, if they want to do that, then they need to come with all the funding and all the ability to do that, and we need to support them through a process, but not give them funding or provide funding to do it.
Well, just the response to that, Jonathan, is that what your approach does is it encourages land banking. Because if someone doesn't develop a growth area, it locks up that piece of land, it increases the value, and no one can do anything else. So that's the indirect consequence. Tell me what they are.
Let's not have that debate now.
Okay. Well, the final point was under that column of policy settings, just whether we could also explore or do a discussion paper on what changes as a council we would like to see to legislative settings, particularly around development contributions or targeted rates, so that, because I think one of the things that I hear from the development community is that in some ways they would prefer to have the resident of the day for the next 20 years paying a levy to spread the cost of the infrastructure over that period, rather than having a lump sum right at the start. And so I know that, like, government is actively looking at what legislative tools there could be to or what tweaks need to be made to the legislative settings, and I just wonder if we could again think about what would actually meet all of our objectives and what's some options we think as a council could put on the table. Because then we can work out the pathway. Is it direct advocacy to government? Is it through LGNZ? Is it what's the pathway?
David, this might be more directed at you, but when we did the Section 17A, economic development review, there was some talk, and I remember the conversation that we had there with Stephen was around, some people don't like coming to council, some people prefer to go to the company and I notice you've got that connection with external partners on a quarterly basis, but I want to ensure that we've got that alignment with the company in terms of understanding what they're receiving as well, so that we're not being blindsided, if you like, in terms of ensuring that they don't spring surprises on us.
Yeah, look, a couple of comments there. One is Lawrence probably indicated where this would be a dedicated topic and focus of a meeting in terms of a cadence for that. But I anticipate, obviously, new chief executive started on Monday, so yet to have a sit down with him yet, but certainly plan on looking to continue a close working relationship. So with the previous CE, that was me meeting at least monthly, but also having that ability where we both pick up the phone to each other and say, look, we've had this meeting today, or I'm aware of this. So see that continuing. And certainly probably being more closely connected than we have in the past around, I guess, a lot of what's been said here, being able to be really clear on what the opportunities are and things. But I think it goes beyond that as well. So we're currently in the process of just agreeing a date to meet with Electra, for instance, as a key utility provider in the district, but they are also wanting to understand some of the demand, but they also, that we're aware of, but they will also know things as well. So it's how do we work with those different players who have sort of an understanding or potentially a role in terms of helping ultimately facilitate development. So a lot of that does come down to that connection relationships.
So had some really useful guidance and direction so far, but did just want to, in the sort of the last sort of 5 or 10 minutes that we've got, just sort of flash up those questions again and put it to anyone who hasn't yet had the chance to comment, give them the opportunity to do so.
If I can be even more direct, what would be great is for Lauren at least, to be able to leave the room later having a good sort of sense of, is there a level of comfort with what's been discussed today, the level of the direction of travel. Clearly not everything's locked down, and there's a few things that have been identified today that we want to add in, but we're sort of feeling like we're right on the edge of the call it diving board, I guess, in terms of wanting to take the step into this space and set things up and start moving in the direction that's been outlined. So it'd be really helpful today if anyone was sitting there with this sort of having a quite allergic reaction, or was excited by it, that we sort of captured that, to have that level of confidence.
I'll just jump in front of David. No, hey, look, I think it's a great piece of work. I guess for me, it's probably just going back to that comment around that interaction with council and how you might get one answer and then secondly get something different from a different person. Is there a portal where you can actually see that past communication and with what sort of team member, so we can eliminate that? Because I know dealing with those sort of things, even in different organisations, it gets quite frustrating as a user, and I think that whole experience then actually goes on and probably projects us in a better light as a council as well. So
I think it's pretty fair to say when we first started thinking about integrated growth, our minds did go to the infrastructure space and the sort of the bigger moves. What we've come to appreciate and realise as we've got into it is you could have amazing planning and have sort of all the great strategies and plans, but if we're still at that very point that you've talked about where we make it really difficult for people to do business with us, where it's conflicting information, too many hoops and hurdles, then we're still going to come unstuck. So that's certainly been a piece that we've looked to wrap into here, is how we work, how we operate, how we make ourselves a place where it's easier to do business in this space, and that we can send really clear early signals and information to those that need to either be making decisions or investment decisions or decisions around processes.
I think this is really exciting. Actually, it's you've got 30 deliverables in here, though. It's a massive amount of work, and while growth in managing that is really important, we've still got to probably O2 and L, local water done well, all those other things. So just making sure that we continue to focus on the stuff that does. But I mean, the fact that you've spread that workload and made it probably a bite-sized achievable is actually really impressive. And I suppose now it's just really a matter of getting into it and chewing off bit by bit, and it's great. Look forward to the sort of feedback and progress that we're going to make over the next year.
A level of detail that Lauren hasn't shown today, but I think is perhaps helpful for the room to understand, is alongside those 5 work streams that has been talked about, essentially sits a GM. And okay, there's, and then obviously Lauren's team is integral to sort of helping work across, but again, just showing the importance and the connectedness right across the organisation, that this piece of work, regardless of how you try and divide it up, does actually have touch points right across the organisation.
And just really to highlight here, under the what we'll do next, as a key piece of that will be that programming and understanding the resourcing requirements, and sort of having gotten a general sense, I guess, from the table, that there seems to be a relative degree of comfort about what we're proposing, with those extra couple of things that have come up around the Māori land, around the, I guess, really capturing that integration with council and experience that customers have with council, and the discussion paper around what changes we want in the various legislative settings. Depending on what that programming looks like, we may see some things kind of come to the top, and then other things kind of fall down the list, so that we can actually deliver on this.
Thanks, Lauren. Thanks, David.
I wanted to be really clear about what I was seeking around the Māori stuff. I don't want it to be token. I actually want it to be programmed. So it is about creating an identifiable pathway for Māori to develop their land. I'll keep it as simple as that, because that pathway itself will illuminate the difficult path that's required for Māori to get to that point. And I'll just be really clear on that. The other one I was just going to note, just for us, because I do wonder how much of this council should carry out, but I just wanted to note that we do have the Horowhenua company. So how much of this stuff can they take? I mean, we're already paying them to do stuff. What part of this can they take off your time? We're already paying them a large sum to develop a strategy. This should be part of it. So I'll just throw that there.
Yeah, so we, obviously with the decisions being made, we get the opportunity to, I guess, work through those contract deliverables as we move forward. So certainly as we start to put greater shape around this, get clear on what those immediate and priorities are, it certainly provides an opportunity for us to look at skill sets they have, the capacity, and where that work might be able to be advanced by them, as I say, instead of our council officers, for instance, and there will be. Very good. Thanks again, Daniel, Stephen, for coming and listening in today, and we'll now move on to Daniel Hagen team for 2 minutes. Okay.
Ashley's sorting out the live streaming.
Good afternoon, everyone. We're here today to give you an update on the wastewater treatment plant strategic upgrade project. The purpose being to provide an overview of the work to date, predominantly which happened in the second half of last year, and then outline the program that we've got through to construction to ensure that everyone's got a real clear understanding of what the key milestones are, and give some initial further detailed information into what the future financial and procurement decisions will be due to the significance of the project from both the environmental and infrastructure perspective, but also the significant cost. So today, as I just mentioned, is to make sure you're comfortable with the level of information that's been provided and the method and the approach we're taking towards the procurement, any additional considerations that you'd like us to take into account, and any other additional information that would help you better understand where we're heading.
In terms of engagement, we've continued to liaise with iwi partners through the Levin Wastewater Engagement Review, 6-monthly hui. We'll be undertaking further engagement as we move through this process. The key focus has been on protecting and enhancing the environment, and that's really a future focus around this project. Late last year, and that's a decision process this council's been on for a number of decades around looking at alternative locations for the wastewater plant. But late last year, council made a decision to move forward with the upgrade program we're speaking about today. As part of that process, I did meet with Lake trustees, also Maupuko and Ngāti Raukawa representatives through the latter part of last year. There was a consistent message around understanding but not supporting, and that really stems from that key concern that Lake Punahou, if the plant was to fail, how will we put measures in place to protect that precious tonga? So as we move forward, there's an understanding that a decision has to be made. Those options have been looked at considerably around relocation of the plant, and it became pretty clear that a relocation, although costly, actually posed other risks to the environment as well, with pumping of raw sewage and the fact that the wastewater flows to that particular location, which is in close proximity to the lake. So our biggest risk we did identify through those conversations is to take a lack of action. We've got a plant that has significant maintenance and structural issues, and we're committing this year to plan and start delivering to mitigate those. So alongside the physical works on site, which are more of a technical nature, we'll continue to look for opportunities to engage with iwi partners and the wider community.
So a brief outline of what we're going to go through today, a little bit of a summary of work to date, just to remind everyone of what's been completed, the current work streams that we're engaged in, what it's going to cost, and how that's going to be impacting on our annual plan budgets and the forecasting going forward, what the program to delivery looks like, and then any questions that anyone would like to cover. Here's the treatment plant as it currently stands. Everyone's familiar with that by now, hopefully. So there's been not a lot of significant investment, as everyone's aware, over the last 50, 60, 70 years since it was constructed. At the start of last year, we were halfway through a master plan exercise with Lucha, where basically they did a quite thorough investigation to the current status of the plant, the capacity, and one of the key focuses is looking at the future required capacity given the growth that's being forecasted. That was completed around June, and then we entered into the next steps of that master plan, which was looking specifically at an option study around what the future main treatment process would look like, as well as at the direction from council, really doing a deep dive into the potential relocation and feasibility, as Dan's talked to. As well as looking at the option study, there was another smaller work stream looking specifically at the digesters, as that's one of the most critical parts that is nearing the end of its useful life. And so all of those things happened in parallel through the second half of last year, to the point that we had a MCA internally here with council officers, which is multi-criteria analysis to determine what the best future treatment process would look like. And there was a conclusion of that, which enabled us to then move into the next stages of design. As well as that, as Dan mentioned, there was a lot of consultation or informing that happened and there was the council briefing and report towards the end of next year to get a resolution around the location. Around that time as well, the digester optimisation study was completed, and the option study was finalised based on the MCA, which gave us some sort of concrete, very, very rationalised and thorough reports to inform the decision moving forward. And the digester study has helped inform the sort of short-term maintenance options for the existing digester. So following on from having that option study completed and the MCA, we moved into looking at specific work streams of what we're going to upgrade. It's pretty clear from the master plan that the headworks is a very integral bit. It's the first thing that first processing that happens as the wastewater enters the plant, and at the moment there's a significant amount of grit getting through, and so you want to prevent that before you upgrade anything else because it affects everything downstream. It's also very related to the inlet pipe because they join, and as we know, that's a really important priority to replace as well. And so that's one of the scopes that we've engaged Lutra with, which is specifically looking at the design for that, or more the high-level concept design, which will essentially form a basis of what will go out to tender towards the middle of the year for a design and build contract. It's a little bit bespoke, needs to fit in a certain place, needs to be built for purpose for our flows, needs to interlink to the bigger plant process, and so that's underway in parallel with the digester preliminary design. So that was the other critical item that was identified as a priority, and so they're working on both those things at the same time. But one of the key things is you can't just replace these components in isolation because it has to be within the bigger picture. So then there's a third work stream as well, which is really nailing down the overarching plant design so that when we do these individual staged upgrades that is in line with the overall concept, so it all works out in the end. So that's just summarising the three work streams that we're working through, and essentially the intent is that by the middle of this year we'll be out for tender for the two physical work components for the headworks and the digester. The digester could be a little bit further on, but there's a real priority on the headworks because we want to have that constructed in line with the inlet pipe so they can both be brought online at the same time. It just makes logical sense. This is just really a visual representation of the design process, which is pretty typical for any project of this size. We've completed the master plan and the option study, and so now we're moving into a concept design for the larger plant. Whereas for both the digester and the headworks, we're in the preliminary design stage. With the detailed design stage, effectively will be finalised working with a partner contractor or consultant, depending on the specific type of design and build procurement we go for and what the RFP has. Pretty big project, pretty unique, but it's not something that hasn't been done across the country multiple times. And through Lutra, we've got contacts with some people that have had extensive history doing this, and so we're going to effectively have some independent advice to make sure the procurement process we're following is in line with best practice and we're not reinventing the wheel, which is something I think local government needs to try to avoid. So in terms of the concept design for the overall plant, one of the considerations of the footprint, we've got a certain amount of space available to us. We want to make sure we utilise that effectively. We need to make sure that the hydraulic profile, which is basically the wastewater flowing through the plant, works. And that when we do the stage approach, we can utilise the existing plant components while we're constructing the replacement ones. And then it's really important to consider how much it's going to cost to operate it, so that when we're looking at our future operational budgets, that they're at the right level and we know what the future costs are going to be. So the headworks, which is essentially the filter at the very start that removes the grit, corn, teeth, lots of fun stuff. Without getting into too much technical detail, there's a really important decision point, which is, does it need to be lower than it currently is, or higher compared to the primary clarifier? Essentially meaning that there may need to be pumps at the bottom of it, which isn't desirable because then you're relying on pumps to pump your water up, but then there's advantages for the gradient of the upstream inlet pipe. But that's a hugely significant decision, and so that's the primary first milestone output from Lutra, which is due in 4 weeks, I believe, which is, does that need to happen and why? and be really robust in it because it's just such a massive decision. It's a lot easier to build the inlet pipe if it's below ground, so that's an advantage. The disadvantages are that you're relying on pumps, and so there's ongoing operational cost, and there's to a degree a risk of power failure, but then there's generators and there's also a bypass option. But yeah, there's mitigations for all of those things, but we just need to be 100% confident that if there's pumps there, there's a reason for that. And it's more than likely that will be the case, but there'll be a really robust report outlining why that is. Realistically, the headworks are fairly straightforward. A lot of it's procuring quite expensive components from overseas. The majority of it's set in place concrete that will be specifically designed for earthquake resilience and things like that. So of the three scopes, probably the less complicated one, but importantly get it right, obviously. Digester, a little more complicated, significantly more expensive. We'll get into the costs in a few more slides. Currently there's two digesters. One was refurbished maybe 5 years ago, I think. The idea, which was based on the digester optimization study and the original optioneering study following on from the master plan, was that rather than have two small ones, we had one big one, and that's sized to account for the future flows from the growth, but also our current flows. And that enables the opportunity to potentially utilise one of the existing digesters to become a future sludge tank. So we're, I guess, maximising on the assets that are already there, reducing the amount of demolition required, and yeah, there's a lot of advantages to having one big one instead of two small ones as well. And so that's going to follow pretty much the same process. The preliminary design will be undertaken by Lutra. I think one of the key things for that is because it's quite a bespoke thing. It's a giant tank that cooks up the sludge, to put it simply. There'll be a lot of market research and also looking at what other people have done, because it's not like there's a lot of people supplying digesters in New Zealand. We're quite removed from other big places, so that's a big consideration. And then similarly, it'll be the current plan is for a design build. The timing of the construction of that will really heavily depend on what the design timeline looks like once we've gone out for tender, because there'll be a lot of interfacing with the existing plant in terms of pipes and power and foundations and geotech, and so it may be that doesn't start construction until early next year. But certainly by the end of the year, we'd be looking to have like a pretty finalised design with a known price. We'll talk about costs in a few more slides. And so just to really quickly segue into the inlet pipe. So as councillors will be aware, this has been on the radar for some time. We were planning on having construction well underway now, probably nearing completion, due to the clear interface with the headworks and the middle of next year that being identified as a priority project, and the question around what the level will be due to the pumping, due to the larger conceptual process of the plant. It actually worked out really well that these things happen at the same time, because it enabled us to consider them at the same time and really get some robust integrated planning. And so we got to a point where that essentially is designed, with the exception of deciding what level it's at. So we're pretty well developed down that design path, and once we've got the clarification from Lutra in 4 weeks, then we'll be able to finalise the inlet pipe design. That'll be able to go out for tender. Depending on if it's below ground or above ground, may slightly impact the way of procurement. If it's below ground, it's fairly straightforward, and then we can just tender that straight out. And the idea at this current stage is for the construction of that to likely commence ahead of the headworks, knowing where it's going to connect. In an ideal world, they'll be halfway through connecting this, and then another contractor or the same, depending on how the procurement goes, will come in and begin construction of the headworks. And then in theory, aligning with our contractual agreements with the CRP, the inlet pipe will be completed before the end of the calendar year, with a significant amount of that being funded via grants from that funding agreement. So it's a great outcome. It's being subsidised for everyone, and then when that is brought online, it'll get brought online at the same time as the headworks, and then that's just confidence for everyone that the main pipe of the wastewater network is brand new, and we'll see a lot of efficiencies across the plant as well due to the increased grit removal at the headworks. The council will remember that project's already been approved late last year, I think it was, to the tune of the budget that's in the LTP, and those budgets have simply been rephased with an alternative network renewal happening currently, and then that one being in the next financial year.
Just ask a quick question. Just around the digester, just understanding you're looking at going from 2 to 1. What would happen if the digester failed? If we've only got one.
Yeah, resilience is definitely something that needs to be considered. I'd need to go back to literature and find out what the contingency plan is should that happen. But I mean, in terms of failure, we're talking it's a tank. Like the risk is pretty low. If it's going to be a failure, it's going to be a catastrophic earthquake failure. At which point, if you have 2, you're going to be facing the same situation.
Or just being mindful of the resilience piece. And secondary, because you talked about repurposing for a sludge tank, potentially, what's the status of the huge tank sitting in Foxton that's not being used?
You're talking about the water treatment plant?
Yeah, the
Yes.
big, fresh, brand new.
Yeah. The team are looking at options to repurpose that within the current footprint of the Foxton for storage. I can come back with a separate update around that. That's water treatment.
Okay. Just when we talk about repurposing, I just think about, if we've got things within our means and it's not actually aligning to a priority right now for Foxton Water, but it could be repurposed for the purposes of this type of development, why wouldn't you? And that resilient piece for me is really important, because if a digester fails, then I actually want to know what that means as an implication on the plant receiving additional waste. Yeah. But anyway, that's right. That's just one last thing.
Sorry. Okay. Question out of my own interest. I may have missed some documents, but at what point do we see how this new system will actually improve the components coming out of the end of the pipe? Have you done that modelling, or have we presented that modelling to us?
The work's definitely been done. Yeah. So that was kind of part of the option study process. So there was kind of 2 work streams involved in that. One is a really thorough analysis of what the current influent characteristics are, and then clearly there's the requirements of the irrigation effluent quality as well, and then whatever's in the middle needs to join those 2 dots. There's a further part to it where you've got to consider growth and the increased amount of effluent coming in, and also what the future RMA restrictions are part of the NPS for the effluent required quality is as well. And then you've got to look at the different treatment options and how you can get to that effluent quality. And so that information absolutely exists, and we can probably distribute that after the meeting for you to look at.
Yeah, it's quite a detailed report. We can share it, but we can ask because we've got a team of experts. We could have brought them along today, but yeah, we're quite comfortable in presenting the work that's been undertaken. We can summarise that, and knowing that there'll be a procurement and final council decision point. That secondary treatment carries quite a large price tag, and it sits as almost stage 2 in this delivery program. So we're looking to kind of cover off the next 12 to 24 months, but we're happy to share that, and then obviously the ultimate decision will be a decision of council around the recommended treatment solution, which
Yeah, absolutely. We'll get like a highlights reel of the benefits, essentially. Yeah.
And just to remind everyone, so in that pipe comes in here, headworks, initially primary clarifiers, where you get your initial solids to liquid splits. Solids go to digester, liquids currently come down to the secondary treatment, BNR, which is the trickling filters. And then after the digesters, we go over to the dewatering, and then there's a sludge tank in here, which is what will ultimately be replaced. As Dan mentioned, initially there won't be a huge jump in quality of the wastewater is the secondary treatment is the stage where that happens. But as in line with our prioritisation, headworks and digesters first, and then second investment is in the secondary treatment, which we're currently budgeting for year 5, 6 of in the LTP. Here's a spoilers for what the future conceptual upgrade to the plant would look like. It's split into 2 colours because one of the objectives of the plant design was that it was essentially modular in a degree, so that we're not upgrading for the full growth in one hit now. It can be done in a staged approach as it's required. So the initial thinking is the headworks is required to be in proximity to the inlet pipe. From the headworks, it goes into the 2 existing primary clarifiers, which will continue to be used in for the next 10 to 15 years. And then the proposed area for the digester is here, which makes a lot of sense because we're keeping the solids train on the east and the liquid train on the west. And then the new MLE or secondary treatment will be in this area here. So this is still a very early concept, and there's a lot of work to do to get to what the final will look like. But as I mentioned earlier, that's happening in parallel with the headworks location is pretty much fixed, and there isn't really anywhere else that would be suitable for the new digester. So it's also almost required to be in this location, also in line with how the different streams work. But there'll be a lot more detail when we come back for procurement approval for the headworks and the digester closer to the end of the year. There'll be a lot more thorough information we can provide and certainty around what the proposals are, bearing in mind that will be approval for procurement, which will be a design and build, so there will still be some elements of design that will be undertaken in line with our partners ultimately. So this is straight out of the master plan, and we've spoken about this before, so because it's very early on in the design process, there is a lot of variability within the estimates. 50 to 100%. And what we've budgeted within the LTP is in line with what's in the literature report, which is 68 million over the first 10 years with a further 27 million in the following, and then 60 million out of that. I mean, that's 20, 30 years away, so what we're really focusing is on what's happening in the next 3 years, and we would expect that within 1 to 2 months we'll have more refined estimates for those first 3 components, which is really timely because that's going to heavily impact what goes into the annual plan for next year. And so you can expect that when we're doing the project steering group briefings and ultimately the annual plan briefings, which I think are in March, May, there'll be some really clear rationale and explanations around how we're managing to fund those, what the risks are, and how everything's being phased in line with these required upgrades, and essentially what impact it's having across the other capital budgets. To give an idea of the breakdown of where that 67 million comes from, this is these are the high-level estimates that were provided in the master plan. So the inlet works, which is the headworks, is 10 million. I mean, optimistically, I think that's probably potentially could come down, but it's better to have the high-level estimate to make sure that the money's available. And over the next 2 months, as we clarify, there's pumps and no pumps is a pretty big impact on what the cost is going to be and things like that. Sludge digestion, hugely high value there. Again, possibly will come down, but will happen as we go through the conceptual design or the preliminary design process. And then just for, comparison, you can see the biological treatment, which is the secondary treatment process, or the liquid train, which the recommended treatment was MLE. Yeah, very expensive, 24 million. So that's currently sitting in years 4 and 5 of the LTP. And I mean, that's outside of this year's LTP, so when we get around to the third one, there'll be a lot more certainty because the conceptual design will be done around phasing and understanding those, and hopefully we'll be able to bring it forward a bit, but we'll have to see once we've just gone through that process. Sludge tanks on there, 1.6 million. The current one is working. There's some concerns about structural integrity. It's fit for purpose for now, but that'll be something that will need to be looked at and would be a logical thing to then approach after the sludge digester's been replaced. But yeah, the conceptual design of the entire plant will really cement in those decisions going forward. But yeah, in the master plan, there's quite an in-depth description of what the risks are, why we prioritise things, and take into consideration the condition of the current plant as well as the future required capacity. So just to go over what we've gone through so far, late last year there was a council resolution to proceed with the upgrades at the current location. We've completed an option study, and digester optimisation study. The option study has clarified that secondary treatment will be MLE, or as that's what the MCA has output. It's also demonstrated the future water quality parameters that we're aiming to achieve, improving the receiving environment, the irrigation area, as well as likely improving any potential odours coming from the plant itself. The digester optimisation studies informed the things in the near future that we need to do to make sure the digester is running optimally, which ultimately, once it's replaced as well, improves the quality of the sludge that you're producing in terms of moisture content, which has a benefit that it's cheaper primarily because we're paying quite a lot of that to go to Body Glen at the moment. So there's a financial benefit there as well. We've engaged Literate, who've been involved for over 2 years now in the wastewater network of Levin, have a very integral knowledge of the plant and the requirements to work on producing the overarching concept design, preliminary design for the digester and the headworks, which will form the basis of an NZS 3916 design and build contract, which we're aiming to tender in the middle of the year, which both are clearly over $1 million and will require both PRG sign-off and the council and a council resolution due to the value to give the delegation for us to tender that work out. That's been done in parallel with the inlet pipe design, which has been shown to be at risk from a seismic activity. It's very old, it's above ground, there's visible cracks in it, needs to be replaced. So we're well and truly down the design path for that. That also needs to take into consideration future growth flows, so it's increasing in size. Ideally it's going to be buried, and there'll be opportunities for potential upstream renewal once we've completed that. And that's part of the CIP contract where a significant amount of it is grant funded, so it's a pretty good outcome really. Essentially the next year's upgrades are the physical construction, headworks, digester, inlet pipe, and then the procurement and approval will be mid this year. That's essentially where we're at with the project. The costs will be refined as we get closer to the AP process, and we'll be aiming for later in this financial year for a council paper to approve the procurement process, and we'll make sure that we get out a highlight reel of what the improvements will achieve. There's other things that I'd also like to see happen, like we also need to we're constructing the upgrade of the plant under the existing designation that's there, so there's an outline plan that needs to come through planning, but it's no different to what the current situation is, and we think it will improve the potential odour implications, and we might do an activity of looking at some potential planting or other aesthetic things we can do to sort of improve the visual aspect of it, I suppose. With the inlet pipe being constructed, there'll be a little bit of impact on the football club there, unfortunately, but we'll minimise that as much as we can. It should, in theory, be a fairly quick process to construct that pipe. It's not under a road. It's offline to the existing one, so touch wood, it should be pretty minimal impact, but once we've finalised the design, that'll be the real kicker if it's above ground or below ground. And we have to be extremely important because you're building a new pipe next to the existing one that takes all the flow. Cool. Any questions?
Yeah, I have a question. It's more aimed at Daniel. As you know, I wasn't really supportive of this activity because of the location of the wastewater treatment plant. And I raised this last night, is that I think there needs to be more work done around risk assessment and mitigating any potential risks from overflow from the current system. I mean, for me, it seems to be completely missed around doing a better job of understanding risks and developing scenarios and what the mitigations may be in advance of that happening. I mean, basically, we have about a 1% chance every year something happening that overflows into the lake, whether it's natural disaster or man-made issues. And we're not paying enough attention to coming up with mitigation strategies around that.
Yeah, there's a number of elements to that we can incorporate into the design. So, one, looking at the current risk until upgrades are completed, and we are looking to run a civil defence exercise collectively that looks around if there was a seismic event, storm event, what are those various, or power, what are those various scenarios. I think you've raised a good point, and also Councillor Tamihana around the what ifs, and that's a similar question that Iwi have asked us around what happens if there is a failure. So I think it would be probably quite helpful for us to engage our iwi partners as we develop up some of that resilience planning, so that there is a shared understanding, because we'd also been asked as to how other councils across the country have involved iwi in plant design and implementation. So there is an outstanding action there that we need to look at incorporation of plant design, but I hear around the importance of the resilience aspect. Firstly, obviously satisfying council and elected members that we're doing everything absolutely within our control to ensure that there isn't a risk, and that if something was to eventuate, we have plans to remedy that. But suggestion to include iwi partners in some of those conversations to share that understanding.
The additional thing in terms of risks that needs to be looked at is avian botulism and spread of avian disease, with the amount of birds that sit on your ponds as well.
Thanks, guys. Really good presentation. I just wanted to go back to the recap part of your presentation. There is where is it? There was a second part to the approval of council which I really want to have included in this wording, and that was to continue to investigate alternate future sites. So that was definitely a part of the resolution we made that day, so I don't want to lose that within any documentation around this treatment plant into the future. It should always remain on everything until this council change that priority. But certainly that part's missing from me there. Grateful that you explained, Tony, the difference between the wastewater and the solid waste that the plant has to deal with. So we're quite clear for our community that the treated water ends up at the pot, which there is a different project going on there that this council support around the pot, with iwi partners and protecting that environment, and obviously the stream down there, the Waiwiri. So that's good stuff. The other one was, you mentioned about the sludge and how we have to transport the sludge to Bonnie Glen, and that's probably another one important part of it that the community need to know, that there's a transportation cost and a whole lot of other things that are associated with that. So I suppose what I wanted to ask was, in the treatment plant upgrades that we want to see happen at this current site, what are the real efficiencies, if any, that we see in the upgrade? So when I say what are the efficiencies, I'm meaning like, is the power going to be cheaper because we've got a better system and we're not running as many pumps, or maybe we're running more manpower? Is the new facility going to require more manpower, more expertise, or less to run the the plant as the upgrades come online? And then obviously the ongoing maintenance. And when I talk about maintenance, it's actually, are the things that we're buying and putting into our plant going to be available in the future, accessible? And I only raised that because I was made aware today of an issue of another site where we can't access things because those are not available to us anymore for one of our own locations. I can check that later, but just want to make sure that future-proofing, that we're installing things that are actually there in 15 years to replace. So I just think about those things. And then I think about the sludge, because even though we're doing an upgrade, are we still looking at options on how to deal with sludge in the future? Or are we just going to continue to keep producing sludge and shipping it somewhere? Or is there alternate uses of that of that material? I don't know, I'm just asking. I know in the past I've seen Wellington City Council used to send their sludge up to Horowhenua Organics, things like that. So I'm just saying, are there alternate uses of sludge? Would somebody else like to take it off our hands? Or is there other technologies that we could be looking at, that how we treat our sludge in the future, that we're actually not having to carry these ongoing costs of getting rid of a waste? So just things I think that I'd like to see us keep thinking about all the time. Because let's face it, the money and the work we're putting into this plant could become the prototype to how we deal with some of our other plants across our district as well. So, yeah, good.
Kia ora, Councillor Tamihana. I think part of what you've raised is really important if we do actually weave some of that into our highlights reel. We know that some of those initial upgrades, just simply getting the grit removal up to modern standards, could have a big impact just on the remainder of the plant. Effectively, if we're tipping sand into a no matter what you've got, whether it's a wastewater plant or anything else, that can cause issues. So there could be a small uplift in the early stages. We're really confident around the fact that that secondary treatment will have a big uplift. We've got open, trickling filters, which are all old hand-poured 1950s technology. All of these components will be designed and built to modern-day standards. So there's a whole lot of optimization that may come of that. So one of the specific work streams highlights operational costs, and there are some key decisions. If there's small lift pumps required to give a slight lift in gravity head through the plant, that'll have operational costs. We really want to understand that as part of our decision-making process. But yeah, it's important that we highlight things. Our recent upgrades at the pot that you raised have seen around about a 40% reduction in power costs. That's just due to us, instead of having to have man-powered switching of valves, it's all computer controlled. There's a weather station that's all connected up, and the pumps can run during the evening rather than during peak times in the day. There's a whole lot of opportunity there, and we'll through this process get to understand with a lot more certainty around any cost savings, which aren't guaranteed at this point. But yeah, eyes wide open. Yeah.
Yeah, the massive benefits to the effluent quality, which ultimately increases your capacity of the pot, right? So it's a good thing environmentally, and it makes the money invested there go further. In terms of the sludge, yeah, it's a challenge that's not unique to us, as you've highlighted. Like it's a national thing. There's some interesting stuff that KCDC has been looking at doing. Ultimately, removing the water content, so like a big thing, but realistically, it's fertilizer. And until there's like a national policy in place, we have to utilize it in that way. That's really, and you only have to look to other countries that are doing it. But yeah, we've done a little bit of work in trying to find an alternative to that, but it's just quite a significant piece of work, and it's something that will be ongoing. But the reality is that you're going to always create sludge. It's just how it works, unless you remove the town. So it's about where that goes after the fact.
I think you make a valid point just saying what you said, and maybe that's a piece of work council need to pursue anyway in terms with the ministry about exactly as you've raised it. We need to see some changes to be able to potentially use this stuff in another way, but until you help us and assist us in that, we can't do it. We've got to be compliant.
Yeah, certainly burying it in the ground is not the best way in the future.
Recap, we are going to come back with the operational outputs, efficiencies, what the new plant will ultimately result in, highlights in terms of the effluent quality, what the benefits are, and did I miss anything? I think that was pretty much it.
Anything else anyone wants included to be secret?
Tony, would it be sensible or wise or beneficial to this project if council proactively considered or made decisions around delegations in terms of the procurement? Because at the moment, obviously, you've signposted to the fact that once we go through a pre-procurement stage, and then you'll come to council for specific decisions at specific points. But does it speed things up if we do that proactively in advance? Because if we're all on the same page in terms of process, could we deal with that separately?
We can go away and consider it. At this point, I don't have a sense that we would need to. It's a long duration project. It's well mapped out with milestones and the interconnections of decisions, and relying on various stages of technical report, which will provide a lot more cost certainty. So in some ways, we'd rather come with a paper that's plus or minus 20% than minus 50 plus 100 at that early concept stage. So we'll give it consideration, but at this point, we're not seeing elected member decision making as a barrier to progressing the project.
Just in terms of the relationship that we've built with Lutra, you're confident that we're getting good value out of that in terms of, is there peer reviews done maybe from time to time just to check that where we're heading in that direction is right, or you're comfortable to sort of continue that relationship the way it is?
Yeah, really good question. And given the huge significance of the project, obviously really important. As I mentioned earlier, one of the things in terms of the procurement advice from an independent person is something we're looking at, but also just an overarching review of, I guess, the rationale provided by Lutra and the way forwards. They've got a long list of experience and examples of projects they've worked on around New Zealand and internationally. They certainly know what they're doing, but before we do go down the road of that, the significant investment in detailed design and procurement for the specific physical construction, within the next 4 weeks, essentially, we're looking at getting a high-level review undertaken by someone externally. It is what some would consider boring project, but super significant, right? Once in a generational thing, and it's not lost on us that we want to make sure that we spend the money in the right way and that it's maintainable in the future and is the best output for what is only going to happen once every 100 years. So.
Yeah, well, we're spending a lot of money, and we're with the upgrades that we're doing to the water, with the reservoir and things like that, obviously, and the growth that we're experiencing, we need to ensure that we are being future-proofing our making sure our communities will catered for in the future. Well, and we're talking 30, 40 years, 50 years probably down the track, aren't we?
Yeah. Important considerations, and the team are obviously working through a pretty detailed process around the design, knowing that post-concept design, a lot of this it won't be Lutra who sort of lead that final piece of the design out. Will actually go out to the market, and there'll be a lot of decisions to make around track record and expertise, along with cost considerations. But I certainly wouldn't encourage a Google search of wastewater treatment plant cost overruns, because they are quite common both across New Zealand and internationally. So that's not lost on the team that we need to do a thorough job and diligence, and we'll certainly be bringing more cost certainty into the annual plan process as well as we look to rephase and allow for works to continue.